to Brandy. I'm going to throw it over to Brandy, who will lead us off in just an introduction. And then after Brandy, shoot it over to someone else.
Thank you, Mike. I was going to point out the recording, but it has been fixed. My name is Brandy Greenelge, and I am a Early Achievers coach half-time and a professional development trainer the other half of the time out of Spokane. And I am on Spokane tribal lands. And I will hand it over to Jamila.
Thank you, Brandy and Mike. And hello, everybody. My name is Jamila, and I am an Early Achievers Coach Lead. I work out of King Pierce, and I am proudly located at the land of our indigenous people of Duwamish. And I will pass it over to Sarah.
Hello, I am Sarah Ackerman. I'm joining you from DCYF on our Early Achievers team. I'm our QRIS Participant Services Specialist, and I am joining you guys from the land of the Puyallup tribe. And last but not least, Charlotte.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all today, and thank you so much for taking the time to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's great to know who's here, and just a reminder, too, that if you have any questions that are top of mind for us, pop them into chat because we'll definitely want to have an interactive conversation today. Let's see. So, like I said, my name is Charlotte Campbell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming to you from Olympia, Washington, which is the occupied land of the Seychelles people who are now members of the Squaxin Island tribe here in the southernmost tip of the Salish Sea. Beautiful day here today, even though I'm in a windowless office right now. But I'm so glad that you all took time out of your sunny day to join us. And I will pass it back to Mike.
Thank you. And we will eventually be joined by the executive director of Hilltop, who is off to my right dealing with licensing in one ear, and then the other ear some construction we have going on to expand our place. So she's a little bit busy, but until she gets here, we will hold down the fort. I do want to share right from the get-go that I'm grateful to be working in partnership with DCYF, and I thought it would be really important just to ground ourselves in the Early Achievers vision and the Early Achievers mission for the state of Washington. And I will eventually type into the chat because it is a lot of words, but for the Early Achievers vision, every child and family in Washington has access to anti-racist, welcoming early learning setting that provides high-quality, responsive services so that they may thrive. And our Early Achievers mission for the state of Washington really is around building upon the foundations of quality early care and education to support ongoing improvement for educators in Washington state so that they can offer meaningful early learning experiences that honors diversity, equity, inclusion for each child and their families. And there's a bunch of bullet points underneath that, which I will type into the chat. But I thought it'd be really great to ground ourselves and make sure that we're connecting today's session and information to the vision, to the mission. That sounded right. All right. So that's in there. I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte and Sarah to talk a little bit about the Jamboard. So I'm going to post that back into the chat for people to pull up, and just here's if you can just mention the two questions and what do we hope to gain from using the Jamboard today.
Sure. Well, I can start. So we really wanted to have an interactive discussion with you all today. And I know that you all are maybe joining with different backgrounds, both in early achievers and in learning stories. So as we share with you today a little bit more about the new early achievers, we're calling it the new early achievers because we've done some major revisions over the past year. We want to hear from you about several things. So I'll turn it to Sarah, if you don't mind sharing the couple questions that we have for our participants starting off this morning or this afternoon.
Yeah, of course. So the Jamboard, you can add to it ongoing, or we're also going to have breakout groups later in the session so that we can both discuss or write. So it kind of meets, whichever your preferred learning style is. So the two questions that we're asking for your guys' feedback on is, what is one thing that you're concerned or worried about in anticipation of starting this new system? Or if you're on, this isn't on the Jamboard, but if you're not participating, maybe what's a barrier that's keeping you from participating? And then the second question that we have is, what specific supports do you think would benefit you and your program? So those are going to be up throughout the session today, and then we'll also have designated time later, like we said, to do a discussion in small groups.
Perfect. So this conversation today is really going to just be a dialogue, right? We have a saying at Hilltop where it's a ball toss. We're going to throw you a ball out, and then you're going to see how you play with it and then catch it, and then you're going to throw that back to us. So the first ball I'm going to throw to is going to be to Darlene, who once again had the two phones in her hands. She's now off, and I'm going to throw a question out to her to start, and then also if you can just introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and your position, even though I said all of that already, that would be great. But the first question I'm going to throw out to you, Darlene, is, what does quality look like to you?
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So sorry I was late. I was talking to an architect about a potential expansion that we're working on, and so multitasking at its finest. But my name is Darlene Guerrero, and I'm the executive director here at Hilltop Children's Center and Educator Institute. I go by she, her, or Aya. And I guess to answer that question, Mike, I always have sometimes an issue when we talk about like high quality in early learning, because quality can look like so many things and can be described in so many different ways, where you'll look at it and see it as being quality, and someone else might look at it and be like, what are you doing? And especially when we're talking about the value of learning through play and the value of allowing children just to explore their spaces. I think that's great high quality, but someone else might come in and be like, you're not teaching my child anything. Where's the academics? What does that look like? And so I think when we're talking about learning stories and this new early achievers process, quality means that there's a purpose behind the learning that's happening in your space, and that you're able to articulate what that purpose is. So no matter who's coming in, they see the value in that.
All right. And to you, Charlotte, I'm going to throw it to you. How do you think this reimagined QRIS system is going to decenter whiteness and work to achieve what Darlene just described as quality from her perspective as a voice of color?
That is such a great question, and really was the central question that we had when we embarked on this revisions process. We've really considered equity for quite a long time in our early achiever system, but when we were forced to press pause on all of our everything that we were doing back when the pandemic hit unexpectedly, we really were able to take a moment and breathe and consider questions that were surfacing in a deeper way than we were able to when we were just speeding along like a bullet train. And one of the questions that really arose was, we've been hearing for years that early achievers felt like we were trying to achieve cookie cutter programs, that quality was one thing. And the tools that we were using, for those of you that are familiar with the environment rating scale, was one of the assessment tools that we were using in programs, and the classroom assessment scoring system was another. We started to think more deeply about who had written those tools, who were they written for, when they're nationally normed and even used internationally, but who are they used on, and who's performing well on those scales? Those were the types of things that we were considering. And we really felt like we wanted to move away from tools that were built within, this white supremacist culture and move towards a more provider-led system so that providers could show us what quality meant to them, exactly what Darlene was talking about, articulate what quality meant to them in their program, and then have a chance to highlight that quality through our system. So our new system, what we're hoping is that providers can really be in the driver's seat, right? That they're sharing what their strengths are, where their goals are for improvement, and then we know that coaching is an essential and well-loved part of our system, and so the coach is really there, like riding shotgun. Maybe they're holding the map and they're helping to keep you on the right road, but the provider is the one that's in the driver's seat.
So, as you know, a lot of what we do is looking around equity and inclusion and anti-racism, and it's even written into the Early Achievers vision and mission. So, Jamila, I want to throw it to you now because children of color are facing disparities in quality of childcare, and certainly within our K-12 system. And I feel like this pandemic is only exacerbating all of that. So how do you believe this new iteration of QRIS, that's a mouthful, is going to really help to shift a paradigm, shift systems, our attitudes, our policies, so that we are able to treat, respect, and view our children as these beautiful, brilliant, and capable human beings?
Thank you so much, Mike, for this question. This is really a great question. And part of this wonderful new system of QRIS and early achievers with the revision is that children they continue to be in the heart of our work. They are still the main focus of our work. And as Charlotte said earlier, in fact, thank you, Charlotte, for highlighting that, is that this system is really a provider-led system by putting the provider in the driver seat. However, it still continues to highlight the importance of the culturally responsive and respectful practices done by the provider on a daily basis, and how they are represented in the environments and in their different activities, including interactions. Being a system that's focused, as Charlotte highlighted, on giving continuous feedback and also highlighting the strengths of the providers and having that flexibility in it, also includes looking at children's individualized needs. So we are building those assessments, those curriculums, those daily activities, and having those interactions based on the individualized needs of the children, and making sure that all children and families are represented. Extremely evident in the way our program profile is set as the beginning step with the new system, and then moving all the way to the video recording and the video highlights and the feedback that they will be getting from their coaches.
So, Brandy, I'm going to throw it to you next because I guess the first four people, I just realized this, we're all on this side, the western side of the state, and you're coming from Spokane. So I often think like people on this side of the I-5 corridor, we tend to like to think we know everything. We don't, and that mentality really has helped create divisions, even within our state, and it really fails to center and honor the voices of those working in Eastern Washington. So how do you think this reimagined system will honor the voices that you're working with?
Thank you, Mike. So I think that there's a lot more similarities than we led on to both sides of the state, but our side does have some rural areas, and I think that's part of the population that it will help give access. And our rural providers in an in an equity type lens, just for programs, you're looking at programs that look different, right? They don't look like cookie cutters. They don't often look like centers, and their curriculums will be based on different things, based on the families that they're serving and what is relevant and real world for the children that they're serving. So it's important that when they're able to highlight the quality of their programs, that comes out in the uniqueness of the strength of their program, and not just what the books say, what the ERS checkboxes say. We also have some tribal programs, and I feel that the new early achievers system will allow them to honor their families and the traditions and their practices more than the old system. Anywhere from being able to sit at low sitting tables, or feed children when they're able to feed themselves, but traditionally in some cultures they still feed children, and it isn't because they can't do it and they don't have the fine motor skills, but there's a lot of tradition and love that's involved in those practices, and we can now honor those practices for those families and bring that home life and those traditions into the classrooms.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sarah, in your opinion, what's the biggest misconception you think people have about QRIS?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I hate to be repetitive because this does really tie to what both Charlotte and Brandy have already talked about. But I definitely think that the biggest misconception is that we want programs to all look the same, and that there's only one type of program that can be successful or should be successful in early achievers. That's not what we want at all. And that's really been the intention of our revisions process, to move away from that. And like Charlotte was talking about, to really decenter whiteness and to move away from that typical, European educational values and really have a broader perspective. We know that historically, many programs have not felt seen or valued as part of the early achievers system, and that they didn't feel that their work was being reflected in their scores. And that's something that we really wanted to address head on. So I actually don't know if you would call that a misconception, because in the past that might have been true. But hopefully moving forward, that will no longer hold true for our system as we progress. We are really wanting to move away from that. Like Charlotte said, we're moving away from some of those really data-heavy tools like the ERS in class. I think one of the big changes that we're also making that is going to allow more providers to participate in a successful way is that we're starting to look more at policies rather than, are you doing everything exactly by the book 100% of the time? If your intention is there by having a policy, say we talk about parent conferences, if you have a policy saying, hey, we make an attempt to meet with parents and share information on a regular basis, in our new system, that's going to be good enough. Where before, that wouldn't have been good enough. It would have been, show us your documentation, show us a calendar, every parent, every 3 months, so we're really trying to give some grace in our data collection methods and allow for that flexibility. So I want to say, I'm hoping that will be a misconception moving forward, that we only want certain types of programs to succeed, if that makes sense. So that's really our goal.
I appreciate the flexibility, and that's something that even I have to work on, right? Just being so Afro-Caribbean, like, no, it has to go like this. And I'm actually going to try to model that right now, right? Because when we're talking about being responsive in the times of injustice, which is the theme of this conference, right? We have to look at the power dynamics that we have in our classrooms, in our hierarchy, and even the power dynamics that I hold right now as a Black male and running and facilitating this panel. So in my head, I was like, D, like, lower your hand. We have Q&A later. But now I'm going to invite you to open up and just be flexible and responsive. So, Dee, do you have a question that you would love to share with us?
Oh, hi. Yes, this is so important that I appreciate the time to ask now instead of waiting at the end. And I'm so happy to be involved in the new revisions. I'm an early achievers lead in our Mount Vernon office in Skagit County. And with our commitment to all cultures, all races, all languages, and all abilities, I wonder how that is going to be shown, that they're not just showing, okay, how do I say this? It's so hard. I don't want to be racist. Okay, I don't want to, it's so hard to articulate, and please give me grace if I mess it up. So in my county, we have a lot of Latinx families, and they only have niños and niñas in their FCC, right? And so I want to know, how is that childcare provider sharing about all cultures, all races, not just their own? And I love that QRIS now says you can show your families, and each child needs to be represented in the classroom, but how are all children represented in the classroom? And same, we have centers that are all Caucasian children. And it's almost like segregation, right? But it's not that it's imposed, but it's just the way families choose childcare. And I want to make sure that all of those childcares are promoting all races, all cultures, everything. And so is there a component of our new system that does that? Or perhaps we should look at that. Like maybe part of the rating too. Not just how do you reflect your family's cultures and the children in your program, how do you reflect all cultures? And not just photos on the wall of children with, different skin tones, or plastic sushi and tacos and costumes. You know what I mean? And I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering, like, how are we going to show that? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great question, Dee. I'm just going to jump in here because I definitely have a few thoughts about that, but I'm sure other people do too, so I'll try and be quick. I think where I'll start is that I really believe that one of the beautiful things about early care and learning, as opposed to our K-12 system, is that there is a lot of choice, and that families can choose a place that feels safe and welcoming to them. Well, at least that's our ideal, that families have choice of what feels safe and welcoming to them. And so if a family, for example, if a Latinx family wants to choose a family child care provider that looks like them, that speaks their home language, then they have that choice. And I think there's a lot of beauty in being, for a young child, being in an environment that looks and feels like home. On our Early Achievers team at DCYF, I am our Government Partnerships Liaison, which is a weird title for the main part of my job, which is working as a liaison with our tribal partners. So I've had the honor of being able to visit a lot of tribal childcare centers and family homes across the state. And in our old system, that was something that they really pushed back against, was that diversity piece. And their reasoning was, when our kids go out into the world, when they enter public school, when they leave the reservation, if we're on reservation, they see white people, they see European culture. When they turn on the TV, that's what they see. And when they come here to our center, we want them to see our culture. We want them to be learning our language and our customs. And so they pushed back on that a little bit. And learning that, I'm a white woman myself. And so when I heard that perspective, it really opened my eyes to questioning whether we need to force childcare providers to share a diversity. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I think that there are opportunities. I think that sharing books from many different cultures, photographs, toys, all of the things that you mentioned, I think are important. I also think that, some of the work that our coaching workforce has been doing around having, critical conversations about race and equity, reading the Coaching for Equity book, and all of the work the wonderful work that our coaches have been doing in considering how to have those conversations with our professional workforce is very important. And I think that we should leave room for choice there in thinking about how they want to set up their environment so that it feels safe and welcoming for the families that are there. So I think it's both and. I think Brandy has something to say, so I can pass it to her as well.
Just in listening to all of what you were saying, I'd like to add that what we know about providers, especially family child care providers and people invested this there, is that if we try to force them to do something, they're going to become more resistant. And I think the education and educating staff is key, and that if we focus less on trying to force them to do some of these pieces, and we educate them as to the whys and the importance of this, they will naturally come around and start adding those pieces to their classroom. That's just a thought I had when listening to you.
Thank you so much, Brandy and Charlotte. And I would also like to add a few points here. And I totally second you, Brandy, and Charlotte as well, in that, yes, we're not forcing providers, but at the same time, we're educating them. So our work is to educate the providers to the importance of representing this diversity in different way, even if it's not represented in their families and the children they serve. And how is this important for the development of the children? Well, we know those children will grow, they will be adults, and eventually when they go out in the world, they are not going to say we only want to work or study in higher education institutions with people who are like us, because they will have to live and maybe study with other people who represent diversity. But what did we give them as early educators? How did we get them ready to their life after preschool, to their work environments that they will be involved in the majority of their life? And also, this is an important part in our Washington State developmental guidelines. So when we look at the developmental guidelines, it doesn't say under me, my family, and culture. It doesn't really say that we only need to represent the kids in our program. It says that kids can learn about representing holidays and traditions. So even if we don't have those holidays and traditions represented by the families and the cultures, but this is something that we can educate the kids around. One good example is the TEDx that come out of our Child Care Resources Office in King and Pierce. So we have TEDx coming out with video recordings and PowerPoints every month, and we highlight some holidays and some celebrations that are happening, regardless of whether, and we share them with the providers, regardless if they celebrate those holidays and traditions or not. So this is an example of how we can educate ourselves, the providers, and also share this with the families and the children. So at least they know, why do we have those holidays? Why do we have those celebrations? Why they are important, and how we will end up working with them as adults when we grow and we go out into the world.
Now I'm going to jump in because as you all were speaking, Charlotte, I was remembering just the Early Achievers Vision, which I'm actually going to post back into the chat. And then I was thinking about the first thing that you were mentioning, just about, well, everything. So my question to you now is, what are some of the ways that you think Early Achievers is advancing equity within the quality improvement and recognition system? And then what are some things that your team is doing to put that mission actually into action?
That's a great question. Yeah. So simultaneously with our revisions work, well, it was sort of happening before, but we've really pushed it along in this last year. We've been working together with all of our system partners to put together a plan for continuous quality improvement in the area of equity within early achievers. And so that plan is actually posted on our website, and I'll be happy to put the webpage into our chat, but I'll talk a little bit about our 3 overarching goals to really advance equity within our system. So the first goal is to build trust through transparent communication. We want our system to be easy to understand, easy to navigate, and we want folks to understand why we're including certain requests or certain requirements. So that goes for our system partners, like our coaches, and as well as the providers that participate in our system, as well as the families. We really want to be building trust throughout the people that we touch as the early achievers system. Our second overarching goal is to either initiate or continue relationships and engagement that represent the diversity of the early care and education professionals and families of young children in the state of Washington. So we want to either build or continue to build relationships with early learning providers across the state. And we want your feedback. We want your engagement. We want your ideas for improvement. We're working hard so that we can come to you, so that we can come to early care and education professionals across the state and be sure that you feel seen, that you feel heard, and that you feel supported. We know it's not your job to come to us. It's our job to find a way to come to you. So we're really working hard on that. Our third overarching goal is to create a cycle to examine our current systems for issues of inequity and to make a plan to address those findings. So we're working with a group that crosses, that includes DCYF staff from Child Care Aware, staff from University of Washington, as well as early learning professionals across the state, to come up with a cycle of improvement. So when we hear feedback, when we hear things that are working well, that aren't working so well, that we have a way to address and to make changes within our system so that we're always improving. We don't want to create something and then just stay static. We really want to be able to address concerns that come up in a regular way. So like I said, I will put our website in chat because there's a lot more detail there if you are interested in digging into some of that. And one more thing to mention on that is that I'm really excited that on all of our web pages now, when you go to look at something on early achievers, you'll see a button on the side that says give us feedback. And you can click that button, and that feedback comes directly to us. You know, I think sometimes people think, oh, it's this huge government bureaucracy. There's 10 people on our team. Myself and Sarah are 2 of them. But that when you're emailing early achievers, you're emailing us. And we have conversations, you know, we meet as a team and we have conversations about that feedback. So just putting a face to the name, I think, is an important first step in building relationships.
Or why wait until then when you can use our Jamboard and you can type out your thoughts and your advice to see what would you like to see in the system, right? I think this is so important to have your voice and to center it. And Charlotte, as you were speaking, you were trying to it was like my memory was being jogged about the video that you and Sarah produced. I'm going to give you the floor. Do you have 2 or 3 things that you want to say about the video to kind of help jog other people's memories?
Yeah, absolutely. If you all haven't had a chance to see the other session that Sarah and I presented about some of the changes that we've made to early achievers and how we see learning stories can really be an integral part of early achievers going forward. I would just really encourage you to do that. But Sarah, do you want to start us off talking about some of the points of that video?
Yeah, sure. So like Charlotte said, the intention of the video that we made was really to talk about both our revisions work for early achievers and the intersection with learning stories, and how programs that use learning stories, or really any other alternative assessment methods, can be more seen within our system and participate successfully. So we started out by talking about, kind of the common goals of learning stories and QRIS, and how really we share the goal of equitable outcomes for kids, relationships being at the center of our interactions, and then seeing and valuing children's unique strengths. I think any teacher that, thanks Carmela, glad you saw the video, saw your chat. I think any teacher that uses learning stories would agree that really elevating a child's unique strengths and sharing that with families is one of the key goals of learning stories. And that is what early achievers is really wanting to move towards. So that's kind of where we started. And from there, we started to talk about why QRIS as a system even matters. Like, how does it impact families? How does it impact educators? So we talked a little bit about how we support high quality child outcomes, how our intention is to create, kids who are going to be happy and healthy and ready for the world. And then we also talked a little bit about equitable access. So subsidy, and how serving families on subsidy really does, a service to those families. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. We talked about the supports that our system provides to ECE professionals, grants, coaching. Coaching is probably the biggest and best support that you can get as an early achievers participant. I'm biased. I used to be a coach, but it really is historically what people have told us is the most helpful. And then the last thing we talked about was how participating in QRIS really gives people an opportunity to influence change. I mean, you guys are seeing and experiencing that right here today, having an opportunity to talk with us, share your opinions, ask questions. So that was really the first half of our presentation. And I'll let Charlotte summarize sort of the second half of the video if you haven't seen it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. So after we talked about why we feel that QRIS really matters, we got into more of the nitty gritty of why and how we revised early achievers. So some of our goals with revisions that we've touched on a little bit already today, but we wanted to shift to a culturally responsive provider-led system. We wanted increased transparency. We wanted the system to be easier to navigate. We wanted it to feel lower stakes for participants. We'd heard a lot of feedback that it felt like a really high stake, data collection felt like a really high stakes situation. So we wanted our new system to feel lower stakes. And we wanted to have the opportunity for participants to get more frequent strengths-based feedback. So those were our goals with revisions. And then finally, we shared where we think learning stories align with our quality recognition system. So in Early Achievers, we have 6 quality standard areas. That's where you can earn points and be rated a level 3, 4, or 5. We see alignment and opportunity to earn points with 4 of those quality standard areas. So that would be in the learning environment quality standard area, the child outcomes, of course, quality standard area, the interactions and curriculum quality standard area, and the family engagement and partnerships. There's opportunities in there to use learning stories to get points in each of those areas. So I see that the link has been shared in chat, so feel free to check it out if you're interested, if you want to learn more. But that pretty much covers the basics, I think.
All right. So we've been talking for a little bit, and I want to get to your questions and your thoughts. I did have one person private message me one, and I'm going to throw this to Jamila. So I think about multilingual providers and those serving refugee and immigrant communities, licensed and hired and home childcare providers. So in which ways do you think learning stories in this reimagined QRIS, I'm never going to get that right, system will be better equipped to serve the lived realities of culturally and linguistically diverse families in our care?
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think that learning stories will play an important part in this, especially that we know that by providers capturing and writing down the learning stories, they are capturing the work and the words of the children. So throughout the different activities they are doing, they are capturing everything with an objective lens, and they are just writing down what the kids are doing without giving their perspective and their part of the story. So this will really enable them to see the different cultural and diversity that the kids are bringing, and how kids are viewing the activity and the work that they are doing through the lens of their culture, the influence of the culture, and their linguistic background when it comes to their interactions when they are doing the activity with their friends or the adults, what kind of scaffolding and support they can provide them, and what the kids are learning and how it's related to their families and their culture and the environment in which they grew.
We're talking a lot about alignment in assessment, so I'm going to throw this to Darlene. Can learning stories be used with teaching strategies gold or WA Kids assessment? And then after you answer that, I'm going to throw it to Sarah next to give you some heads up. How do you think all of that aligns with early achievers?
I absolutely think that learning stories can relate to TSG or to WA Kids, because it is all about documentation and observations. And so, when you're doing your assessments in TSG, you're pretty much writing a story of what you see, and that's how it's rated, right? So I think it's a mind shift for a lot of people in the practices that we've been doing for years as educators, and it's just making it seem more user friendly, I guess. And it allows, learning stories allows for you to invite the parents or the families in the journey, right? So by allowing a family member to either create a story themselves or have more access to these stories in a way that's not as formal, I guess is the word it's coming to mind, as TSG. So if you are a provider that is using Teaching Strategy Gold or the core curriculum or whatever other assessment tool you're using, a lot of times you are writing documentation. So just it's shifting your mind in that way. This kind of opens it up a lot more to be able to be more self-expressive.
And then Sarah?
Thanks, Darlene. I really appreciated your thoughts. I actually want to talk a little bit about programs that don't use TSG or WA Kids for whatever reason that they choose. Historically, a lot of providers felt like if they weren't doing TSG, it was much harder to be successful in early achievers. But providers who are using learning stories and not using TSG can be successful because of the revisions that we've done. So the first area, and Charlotte talked about this a little bit with our quality standards. So the new assessment technique that we're using at Early Achievers is these video highlights, where the provider gets to share whatever they think quality looks like in their program. It is intentionally open-ended. And say you're a teacher and you have a lesson that you want to do that you want to write a learning story about. You could also videotape that as part of your video highlight really easily. Learning stories can also be both an example of an informal or sometimes even a formal assessment. They'll definitely get points for informal assessment if you're using them regularly. They could be formal assessment if you can show that your learning stories cover the majority of our the Washington State, you said it earlier, Jamila, the ELDGs, if you complete our alignment tool. Thank you, Brandy, with the visual, yes. So you can show alignment if you're doing learning stories that cover a variety of developmental domains. And then you can easily earn points for learning stories for family engagement and partnership. Learning stories are meant to be shared. That's part of doing them, is to share them with families and to involve families in that learning, like Darlene was talking about. And simply by doing that, you will meet the requirement for the family engagement and partnership points. And then the last way, which is a little bit of an outside of the box way that learning stories could earn points within the Early Achievers Quality Standards, is through professional development. Communities of practice specifically. If you have a group of, Jamila's a community of practice facilitator, so I see her doing a happy dance over there that I'm going to talk about this. So if you have a group of staff who regularly get together to talk about their learning story practice, maybe they're giving each other pointers, reading their learning stories, you know, maybe they're working with a coach to, like Darlene said, shift that mindset into a more anecdotal type of assessment. All of that will count toward points for curriculum and staff supports. So because we are putting, you know, giving the providers more opportunity to highlight quality in their own way, and we're trying to be more flexible with this new system, learning stories can now show up in a variety of different places. And it's going to be much easier to integrate that practice into early achievers if a program uses learning stories. So, yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Right, Brandy.
I've been trying to be patient because I'm actually really excited about the prospects for providers using learning stories as an assessment tool. When you look at the early learning developmental guidelines, and for example, I'm looking at the toddler piece, and it talks about explaining and describing family traditions, history, rituals, and activities, and continuing to involve your children in them. If you're writing if you're writing a learning story as if it is an assessment documentation, and you have children at circle time showing pictures of their families and their culture, and then you're documenting what they said during that and making it, you know, taking those pictures and that documentation, you have your assessment that aligns with the ELDGs. In attainable for providers who don't have the funds to use TSG. TSG can have a lot of financial barriers for actually smaller programs. So it's really exciting that they can still document and align these tools with learning stories.
Mike, I just wanted to also add that I think that for a lot of providers in the previous Early Achievers QRIS system, providers opted not to go through the process because of it, not just TSG or using class or ECHRS, but it's also, I know for Hilltop was we made the choice not to do Early Achievers early on because we didn't want to change the practices that we had in place around opting not to do TSG or Early Achievers or some other prescribed assessment tool. And so, I mean, we're talking about learning stories, and it happens to be that we use learning stories here as an organization, but that aside, the new QRIS system or Early Achievers and how it's being adapted is really opening the doors for any provider to become successful and to have have access to these resources that come with the system. And so, earlier we were talking about limitations around whether or not it was cultural, welcoming their culture around the Latinx sort of community. But there's also a lot of providers out there who chose not to go into the system that had access to the resources, or who had different limitations. And so I think that something that is really exciting to see happening for providers out there is that no matter what system you're using, whatever barriers you had, those limitations are going away, and that there's a lot more accessibility. And I think that by telling your own story in whatever capacity, whether or not you wanted to call it a learning story or just a video documentation, you don't have to have those barriers there anymore. And that there's a lot more, a lot of people rooting you on, whether you're a family home provider or you're on tribal land or whatever your circumstances are. I see the state taking 1,000 steps forward to say, let us help you evaluate your program in a way that's not restricted.
So that was all the questions that people just private messaged me. Is there anything else that people want to get off their chest before we stop talking and then you all start talking in breakout rooms? All right. So we are going to put a couple people, or can one of my co-facilitators read that from the chat as I set up the breakout rooms?
Yeah, Carmela just put something into the chat that we need to use the verbiage of learning stories with providers, as this is a new concept that I as a coach need to use and give definition to providers, what this means and how to implement. You're absolutely right, Carmela. There is one of the things that we're hoping to do, with this session, but also going forward, is introducing what learning stories are and the concept of learning stories to a greater number of providers across our state. One example of something that we're doing that I'm so excited about is that Mike, along with a few of his colleagues, is going to be presenting a session about using learning stories at this summer's Indigenous Children, Youth, and Families Conference. This is a conference that our DCYF Office of Tribal Relations puts on every summer. So I really am excited for more of our tribal providers to learn about using learning stories and hopefully adapt some of that practice in their programs. But yeah, definitely spreading the word about learning stories and how they can be used and all of that.
Fantastic. All right, the rooms are all set up, and I'm going to send you out on your way. And I believe, no, you do not have the questions. So 2 questions that I want you all to just kind of chat about is, the first question is, if your program uses learning stories, what is one way that you can highlight this practice as part of your early achievers participation? Or if your program does not use learning stories, what is a quality practice that you are excited to share, and how do you plan to highlight this practice? I'm going to also throw that into the chat so you can walk away with that. And we will see each other back in about 10 minutes. All right. How is everyone going to stay cool this upcoming weekend?
Gonna hide out in the basement.
I'm going to jump in a beautiful Montana cold glacier-fed lake.
I also think it's handy to be a Midwesterner in Seattle right now, because my entire faculty is dying. It's 85 degrees. I think they might all actually die, but I still have jeans on. It's not even that hot yet. So
I agree. I'm still in long sleeves.
Swooped out.
I am thankful I got an opportunity to acclimate. We just got back from vacation in Nevada where it was 117 one day. I did legitimately think I was not going to survive.
All right, looks like we are all back. So at this point, I want to do two things. I want to remind everyone that we still have our Jamboard open. I just shared my screen. Don't mind the dirty desktop that I have. So we have our first question here. And then when you go back in, if you click on this little button that I'm circling right here, click on that and type in your new one. Whatever you do, do not click clear frame because then we lose all the data. So don't do that. But definitely click on that. And then you can type it in by hitting the sticky note right here and then type in whatever you want. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think it would be pretty cool if we actually shared a learning story at this point. So I am going to do a little bit of that. Nope, my screen has not switched over. Hold on. All right. Round two, there you go. All right, we're gonna share a learning story. And I thought it'd be great to just pick your brain. Or show one that how we write it at Hilltop, and then ask a couple of follow-up questions to the panelists. So this one was written in April 2021. It's called Ramp Painting from our toddler classroom. So the teacher wrote, I noticed that the raindroppers have been eager to explore ramps in the classroom and watercolor paints in the studio. So a few weeks ago, I combined their interests by setting up a ramp and watercolor activity. The children used pipettes to squirt watercolor paint onto paper on a ramp. Here's what happened. And the interesting thing I thought this educator did was she didn't go right into explaining it with her words. She just shared photos. So here we see the first page of our children doing that. And then here are the second page. And then she wrote, I displayed the final product in the hall along with the photographs of the children working. Now, before COVID times, we would invite families to study and reflect on such work. Instead, the adults in the building left sticky note reflections about what learning they saw happening. So this is also another way that we use learning stories at Hilltop to not only engage families and obviously for their children, but to engage each other. And some of the reflections that our educators wrote were, what happens when watercolor goes down the slide? What happens when they mix? A shared community experience, curiosity, investigation, experimentation, joyful discovery. Why is the paint moving down? What happens when you do a little water versus a lot? So those are just some of the questions and reflections that they shared. So as the story progresses, the teacher then writes, after discussions with other educators and reflections, I decided to continue our ramp and paint exploration. This time we used circular mesh sponges and watered down tempera paint in smaller groups. Here is what happened. And as you can see, a couple of the photos, they clearly got very messy. And more photos. So centering the children and removing the educator's voice. Although they are part of the learning environment and the community, centering on the children. Today I hung the final products and photographs of the children working in the hallway. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections around two questions. So she asked two questions. What learning do you see happening? And what ramp and paint activities should we try next? So this was both a question that she asked to the educators who she shared this story with, as well as the families. But this first question, what learning do you see happening? I actually want to shoot that question to, let's see, who am I going to ask? Let's go with Jamila and Brandy. What learning did you see as a coach? What learning did you see happening during that time?
And Brandy, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. There's just so much, but a few highlights. Of course, science pops out and art, cause and effect, the colors mixing, turn taking, waiting, sharing, a lot of those social emotional learning, just all wrapped up into one activity. It was fabulous.
Thank you, Brandy. And I second you in that there is a lot of learning happening, especially when it comes to social emotional. And this includes also interaction with peers and adults. There is science happening, there is art. We can also include fine motor skills in there. If the kids are moving from one area to the other, it also includes some large motor skills in that while they are moving. It includes social studies, it includes science, we can include math, we can include all the developmental skills. And this is really a great learning activity.
So the story actually didn't end there. They wrote they went on to write more. And the learning continues. So she wrote, the next week we returned to pipettes and watercolor paints. I asked the children to make observations as we worked. Here's what they shared. Look at it going down, down, down. Look at it go left. Mine went down the same train track. Ooh, it's going down. There are two rivers going down. And one of the child spent several minutes using their pipette to move watercolor paint from one jar to the other. This jar started as yellow, and then they observed, look, it's not yellow, it's green, it's getting black too. When we were done, I asked the artist, what did they see? Colorful, one exclaimed. Green train tracks, another one. Black and green. One of the children said, I don't know. So then she offered another reflection. You raindroppers are avid artists and scientists. So how do you see your children at home engaging with art? How do you see your child as a scientist? And what connections do you see between art and science? Now, another week later, we returned to pipettes and watercolors. That is, yes. And here's what they shared. The teacher asked, what will happen to the paint? And the children exclaimed, it will fall all the way down to the towel. It will splash. If we paint at the top, it will go down. It will make a dot. So the teacher pressed on, what tools do we need? Pipettes, paint. The teacher also asked, what do you see? It will go down. It will go down the same line. The other one pushes the other one. The black pushes the black. Hey, it bubbles. It bubbles, bubbles, and pops, pops. It splashes. And at the end, one of the children asked to pour the cup of paint. This reminded me of a previous question. What happens if you do a little water versus a lot? So I posed a question as we watched. And the last sort of reflections that they offered is, your raindroppers are avid artists and scientists, so reiterating that. How do you see your child engage with art at home? How do you see your child as scientists? And what connections do you see between art and science? So I want to ask a question to Charlotte and Sarah around can you just help us show how this story could earn points within the new early achiever system?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I want to start by kind of talking about the activity itself. So this planned activity at any point, at any of the 3 points, would be perfect for a video highlight. The teacher could easily videotape the first, second, or third session of their painting, and then they would submit a lesson plan, however formal or informal, it's going to be very open-ended. And then there will also be some reflection questions. And the reflection questions actually already mirror the reflection that's being done as you write the learning story. So it would be a really easy transition to turn this activity into a video highlight. The other thing that you could do with a learning story like this, if it's part of your teaching practice to share learning stories with your class, either just by putting them out for children to look at individually or by reading them as a group, that would be a really fun and unique video highlight as well. You know, instead of videotaping a traditional story time, you could videotape a small group reading their learning story. Like, that's like layers on layers on layers of learning. It would be a really cool and unique way to highlight quality that wouldn't have really been seen in the previous iteration of our system. So that's one way that this could be done.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say another place where I really think that learning stories could earn points is in, particularly this one, is in the family engagement and partnerships quality standard area. It's really clear from this story that the teacher is inviting the family to see what's happening in the classroom and reflect on their children's learning. I love all the photographs. If I was a parent, I would just be so tickled to see these pictures of these kids engaging and learning. And if your program meets regularly with parents, either, you know, at the door during pickup to have a short discussion, or having conferences, that sort of thing, discussing the learning that's happening with the parents is absolutely the way that you could earn points in that quality standard area.
So being mindful of time, I want to end, I've been scribbling a couple of notes over here of questions that I want to ask you all. And so we're going to end with those couple of questions that I have for each of you. And I'm going to start with Darlene. I know you wear many, many different hats, and I kind of want you to put each of them on at this point. So one as an educator, one as an ED, and one as a teacher prep professor. So from each lens that you hold, can you describe how you think this new system will better support the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I wear my educator hat, I think that it takes the pressure off of having to feel like someone's coming into your classroom to observe you. So, you know, when you had an evaluator come out before, you sort of were prepping for the test, I guess, or the assessment, whether it was class or ECHRS. And so I think this new system allows educators to just be their natural selves in their classroom, and we're able to come in and do an observation or do a video of them in their I want to say in their natural habitat, where it's just less pressure. So I think as an educator, I would appreciate that perspective. From the ED side of it, I think being able to tell our story as an organization is something very special. You know, I think about this last year, or almost 2 years of journey that I've gone through with Hilltop, and being able to have the opportunity to share our story in a very authentic way feels really good. And it also feels like it's more authentic to who we want to be as an organization, in honoring every special individual that works here and every child that's in our space. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity to showcase the work that we're doing here as an organization. And I think the last perspective of being a higher education faculty member is teaching a different way of assessing children's work. I think it was I don't remember, maybe Brandy, who had said that you taught assessments classes in higher education. I can't remember who said that, but there's so many different ways to evaluate our work. And so when we're doing classroom observations or curriculum classes, or even just teaching about ECE in general, being able to just talk about your story means a lot. And I what I love about learning stories, it is just a way of you being able to tell your own personal story in whatever fashion that looks for you. And so as educators in this work, our personal journeys, our personal stories make us who we are as individual educators. And so I'm just grateful that there's more attention going on, how important and the value of stories are. That's very different than a very formal assessment world.
And I hope that also, as you, Brenda, as well, who is a professor at the University or Washington State University. I didn't want to get that wrong. It's definitely not UW. I hope what Darlene also said resonated with you as well. I'm going to shoot it over to Charlotte. So, how is Early Achievers expanding to intentionally include tribal nations and in-home providers in this work?
Well, good question. I'll try to be quick. I have a lot to say here, but I'll start with our tribal partners. So you may not be aware that when Early Achievers was formally created in 2013 through the Early Start Act, there was actually a provision in there that stated that the department needed to look into alternative quality assessment tools that better fit the culturally specific needs of the tribes in the state of Washington. So we've been on a long journey with our tribal partners in searching for alternative assessments. I think that our new Early Achiever system, that there is a lot in there that will be appealing to a wide range of providers across our state, including our tribal partners. However, we have simultaneously been had a work group going with our tribal partners to look at a program evaluation process that was created by the Aboriginal Head Start Association of British Columbia. So this is an Indigenous program evaluation process created by Indigenous people for Indigenous people. And they've been so generous to share this tool with us. It really centers culture and language in the evaluation process. And I'm very happy to report that we actually just wrapped up a pilot. 2 programs volunteered to pilot using this tool, and we have had nothing but positive feedback. So we are looking into having an optional alternative pathway for our tribal partners. But a lot of what we learned through this tool and through this process has been built into our regular, for lack of a better word, Early Achiever system, including, the strengths-based aspect. The program profile in particular has been really inspired by this tool. We're asking a lot of questions about how folks are creating a safe, welcoming learning environment, how they're centering the languages and cultures of the people they serve in their program. And, hoping that by having a system that is inviting and welcoming to all to participate, that we'll really hear from more voices and be able to better meet the needs of the community of that particular program. So that's our tribal partners. As to our family homes, this is another area that definitely of growth for us as a system. Like I said, we have a lot of work and a lot of thought going into how we can better reach people that we don't typically hear from. So that's really a work in progress in terms of some of the goals that we're creating for ourselves. We're trying out new and innovative ways of being in touch with people, working through our coaches, sending out text messages, having things on our website, emails, letters, just everything that we can do to reach more and more people. We're trying everything and anything and everything there. So just hoping that this webinar is just another example of that, and that folks feel inspired to be in touch and to be involved.
Thank you. And I think, Brandy, you beat me to it, but I'm going to still invite you to say if you have anything else. Well, my question was around, DCYF has just shared that this revision work really is working to create a system that is more inclusive and recognize many types of quality programming. So how will the unique strengths and qualities of programs, especially in the area that you work with, can be recognized?
I've taken, excuse my dogs, someone just pulled up. The life of working from home. So I had a lot of notes and thoughts about how this would help providers and how it will highlight their strengths. And it really boils down to flexibility. There's flexibility in the access, there's flexibility in the way that they're going to highlight the strengths of their programs, whether that's through the program profile or the highlights they choose to showcase the types of assessments that they will do, and then how they honor their families. It's all just very intertwined, and I'm really excited about what it the prospects of what this new system offers to families, statewide, and to providers.
Thank you. And no pressure, Sarah, but you're going to close us out. So my question to you is around the Fair Start for Kids Act. So I know it is historic and it is a massive piece of legislation that touches on so many different aspects of early learning. So how will the passage of the Fair Start Act affect early achievers, and early learning programs?
Thanks, Mike. I think this is a wonderful place to end because it really has me personally looking toward the future with excitement because it really is a historic piece of legislation. So because this piece of legislation is so large, we're really still in the initial planning phase. But we do know that there are 3 areas where there's going to be significant investments that will directly impact early learning providers. The first one is that we know there's going to be investments in supporting recovery of the childcare business sector. There's going to be investments in supporting the early learning workforce. And then there's going to be investments in expanding access to affordable, high-quality childcare. And that will include direct investments to early achievers. I think one of the things that we're going to see a big impact from soon is rate increases for providers, which are set to come out in July 2021. We really hope as we begin to increase our rates while lowering the barriers created by early achievers, we can see more and more programs serving families on subsidy, especially programs that are using these cool and unique models like learning stories. That's really, we want to lower the barriers from early achievers and increase that funding for programs that are serving subsidy. So that's really something I'm excited about, and I think a really hopeful and positive note to end our time on. So,
you know what? As you were saying that, I realized, actually, we forgot about Jamila. I didn't over you. So, I'm going to ask a question around coaching. Since you are a coach, how will coaching continue to support providers' goals, and what does this look like in a virtual system?
Thank you, Mike, and no worries. Yes. So coaching is still the main and the most important resource in this whole process. And I'm going to try to make this as short as I can. And definitely it is there in every single step in the new system, and we refer to it by the coaching cycle. I wonder if I can share really quick a quick image. So you can see that this is our map that we follow, starting from the program profile all the way to the level 4 video highlights. Coaching cycle is there in every single step. So this is where our coaching is in the new system, and they will be providing support to providers to support them with the program profile, with the video highlights. In the virtual world where we are right now because of COVID, we do a lot of Zoom observations, Zoom meetings, the professional learning communities that Sarah just referred to previously, which also educate, and they help providers to learn about different topics We have STARS trainings done virtually by our coaches. We have a lot of activities that we are all shifted into the virtual Zoom platform, and we are looking forward to go back in person soon, because as we know, coaching is going in person. We're just waiting for that green light.
All right. And I appreciate you all for coming, for sharing your time, your wisdom, your energy with all of us. I feel so much more informed and relaxed that this is not going to be an overbearing system. And I look forward to how we can continue to grow and work together and be in relationship and community with you all. So on that note, I'm going to say sayonara to everyone. Take care of yourselves, look out for one another, and we will see each other soon.
Thank you.